Welcome to the Wilmington Public Library's event, The Sun Does Shine, an evening with Anthony Ray Hinton. Last week we were contacted by Mr. Avi Gold, the director of the dance at St. Andrew's School in Middletown, Delaware, who informed us that they had recently held a performance inspired by Mr. Hinton. After talking with Mr. Gold, we knew tonight had to include these young students' artistic interpretations. We could think of no better way to begin tonight's event than with the hope that our youth give us. It is my pleasure to introduce Derek Ike and Stephanie Tanua.
We of this realm, blessed enough to be posted at the helm, can consciously captain a nation by responsibly navigating our own ship, safely taking our own trips, and understanding the journey, and undemanding existence would weaken me. How bright can a beacon be without darkness to dissipate? Without the experience of trial and error, however could I anticipate the obstacles that lie before me? Unseen to the untrained eyes of a mundane imagination, unstained with aggravation, pain, and scars. How can I know how far is the reach of my limitations? This cannot come through imitation. Each of us possesses the fire to illuminate the haze that obscures the paths and trails we blazing, with potential to be amazing. Yet we continue to dwell in a maze of disgrace, crippled by ignorance, consumed by self-hatred. Entombed in our own doubt, we become just about faithless, doomed to become faceless, unless we open our mind's eye to who we are and openly embrace this identification. Hope can replace despair, and love obliterate hatred, dismembering the twisted matrix that encapsulate the ones who made it. Poetically, it's just us. Freedom isn't where you live, but how you live. It just is. Just causes should be stood up for. Injustice never put up with. The phrase good enough should have never existed. Cop-outs are what let cops out of taking responsibility for abusive position. The truth forever has been and ever shall be the ultimate mission. Make a decision. Right now.
We of the world got a lot to do. But as strong as we are, we're still vulnerable. We don't want the size, bigger appetite. Gotta follow my hopes, so's an antidote, giving cancer life. We own the world.
She had the courage to take a stand for what she believed. At the risk of losing her life, she had the courage. Do you have the courage to act outwardly on what you see inwardly? Or will you die a dreamer? Will you die on the verge and on the edge and in the land of coulda, woulda, and shoulda? The strong hand rules the roost. Do you have the courage? I'm going to drop something on you. It takes courage to be successful. It is far easier not to be successful. Misery will always have company. Success breeds contempt. If you don't want to make waves, be mediocre. Be normal and fit in. Then neutralize everything he put in you. Just fit in with everybody else. Dress like them, walk like them, act like them, eat like them, go where they go, think like they think, do what they do. And once you neutralize your uniqueness, you don't need courage. It takes courage to be different. It takes courage to go where you've never gone before. It takes courage to get you outside of the box. It takes courage to be successful. It takes courage to win. People don't talk about people that don't win. If you win, they're going to talk about you. Do you have the courage to stand there, to voice keep raising and the people get to talking and you stand there and say, I've come too far to turn around, touch your girlfriend and say, do you have the courage? I'm going to say something to you. It takes courage to be exceptional. It takes courage to be wise. It takes courage to be rich. It takes courage to be educated. It takes courage to be knowledgeable. It takes courage. And I'm just wondering, in this weak, watered down, mediocre society that we live in today, in this reality TV world we live in today, I'm wondering if there's anybody left that's got the courage to say, after all I've been through, and all my ancestors have been through, and all my parents have been through, I didn't come through all of that just to fit in with normalcy. I have the courage to go after my dream and stand for the Lord. Is there a woman left in this entire Coliseum that's got some courage?
Well, good evening, everybody. On behalf of the Wilmington Institute Library, I'd like to welcome you to a wonderful event today. We've got a great program today, and we've got a distinguished panel of guests and Mr. Anthony Ray Hinton. How many of you had a chance to read the book or peruse it before the event? Good. Did it make some of you angry? I know I was very angry reading through some of the book. I mean, just the woeful injustice and inequities in our criminal justice system. It was just mind-boggling. It was just unfathomable. However, my exasperation, quickly subsided. As I was just amazed and in awe of Mr. Hinton's fortitude and his resilience and his ability to transcend insurmountable odds. So I kind of had an ambivalent reaction to the book. But other than that, we'd like to welcome you here. I'd like to acknowledge a few people. Are there any elected officials here? Raise your hand. Anybody go to the dentist this week? There you go. Newcastle County, the state. Is anybody here from Newcastle County? Okay. The state of Delaware? Wonderful. Okay, well, let's go ahead and let the games begin. I'm going to show them.
For 30 years, Anthony Ray Hinton was a deadbeat woman.
Thank you, Jesus! Thank you, Lord!
Prosecution seemed to take my life from me.
58 years old, Hinton lived more than half his life inside a cage, Holman Correctional Facility in southern Alabama. Today, he's seeing and experiencing things for the first time in decades.
Oh my goodness. So this is the
He is welcomed home, a party in his honor, hosted by the Equal Justice Initiative, led by attorney Brian Stevenson and his team of attorneys, who fought for decades to win Hinton's freedom.
Thank you for giving me my life back. Just being here as a team, you can say that you got an innocent man off death row.
His nightmare began in 1985. Ronald Reagan was president, Back to the Future was a box office hit, and under the cover of darkness, two Birmingham restaurant managers were shot dead at closing time, just months apart. A third victim, another man who survived the shooting and helped identify 29-year-old Anthony Ray Hinton, as the killer. You're a free man now. What does that mean to you?
It means everything. I mean, you never think about your freedom until it's taken away from you. You couldn't put a price tag on it. That's my $12 back already.
So much about the world has changed, but the greatest still is a world without his mother. She died while he was locked away.
It can't get no lower for me. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm proud of it. That's what's the love of my life.
He goes back to the home they shared together, now abandoned.
Kind of hate to see it in this shape.
It's his first time there since the night it was all taken away. This is the room where Hinton's mother kept her .38 caliber revolver. Police said it was the murder weapon. Hinton's court-appointed public defender hired a supposed ballistics expert to dispute the prosecution's claim about the murder weapon. A persuasive expert, he was not.
So his ballistics expert was blind?
In one eye, yes, that's correct.
He had to ask how to turn on the machine. He couldn't see it. He had to ask somebody, please help me. So when they put him on the stand as my witness, they crucified him. I said, they're going to find me guilty.
Hinton was sentenced to death. He was ordered to spend the remainder of his life in prison, living inside a 5-by-7 cell.
Pretty much sleep in a fetal position because your feet hang over the bed. You only have a bed that is mounted to the wall and a toilet. And that's what I lived in for 30 years. They took my 30s, my 40, my 50, but what they couldn't take was my joy. I couldn't do a thing about the years, but I could control my joy.
53 inmates were executed at Holman while Hinton was on death row.
My darkest memory would be seeing so many people that I got to know be executed.
He languished in prison for years before his case reached appeals court.
I had never been so convinced of someone's innocence than I had in Mr. Hinton's case. No one asked.
Judge Sue Bell Cobb was one of those appellate court judges who believed his story.
There was no incriminating evidence. He didn't have anything from the robbery. There were no fingerprints.
This is extremely unusual.
His appeal was denied, but his team kept fighting.
We'd exhausted every state court appeal, and it was the United States Supreme Court that finally intervened.
The result was a new trial the Ray Hinton had been waiting for. But just a few weeks ago, the state of Alabama dropped the case after a new look at the evidence could not match the bullets to the gun, and Hinton was released.
Since I've been locked up 30 years and finances is tight, $5 a slice. Why is that? Bitterness kills the soul. I cannot hate because my Bible teaches me not to hate. I've seen hate at its worst. What would it profit me to hate? I want you to know there is a God. He sit high, but he looks low. He will destroy me, and he will defend, and he defend me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Anthony Ray Hinton. Thank you.
It is an honor to be here. As you gave me that soul welcome, I would like to ask you to give one of your own a welcome, Mr. Brian Stevenson, who is not here, but he is here in spirit. How does one survive 30 years of pure hell? I've looked in encyclopedia. I looked in the dictionary. I took to the street and I asked someone
Can you give me another word that is worse than hell? No one has been able to give me a word worse than hell. I lived in hell for 30 years. But you see, I didn't let that hell live in me. 3 years of going to death row, I didn't say a word to a human being for 3 years. Not even my mother. I was so angry that I didn't want to talk to nobody. But there was no one I was more angry with than God. You see, I don't know how many of you ever lived in the South. The South have these black Baptists. They teach you from a little child to believe in God, to trust in God. God can do everything but fail. While I was in trial, I kept asking, where are you, God? Why have you forsaken me? Where are you when they lied on me? Where was you when they was prosecuting me for a crime they knew that I didn't commit? And I said, God failed me. God don't live here anymore. I want you to understand something. I didn't say I didn't love God. For those of you who still somewhat chastise your kids, you chastise them because you love them. You're angry at them for that period, but you still love them. I still loved God. I was just angry with him. How does one survive 30 years when he knows that the authority knows that you're innocent? I wouldn't like nothing better to tell you the night that the state of Alabama made an honest mistake. I wouldn't like nothing better to tell you that race had nothing to do with me spending 30 years in a 5x7. But I come here tonight to tell you the truth. The state of Alabama didn't make no honest mistake. The state of Alabama knew I was innocent. And race in class had everything to do with me spending 30 years in a 5x7. You know, people ask me all the time, what is it that I love about the South? I love the weather. And as you can see, I love the food. And I love the fact that those that are racist is point blank honest about it. I love that. But how is it that when you convict a man that has sworn to take up the oath and believe in justice, when I was convicted, the prosecutor was quoted as saying, we didn't get the right nigger today, but at least we got a nigger off the street. How does one survive when he knowing that the same man that made that statement is the man that prosecuted? Well, see, after 3 years, I realized I had no control of my situation. So I decided that I would live regardless of them sending me to hell. And if you read my book, and for those of you who haven't read the book, you ought to run out here tonight and get that book. That is the second best book that ever been written. Bible being number 1. But when you read that book, you'll see that when I was in hell, I came out of 3 years of silence simply because I woke up to the sound of a grown man crying. A man that I didn't ask who he was, where he was from, or nothing for 3 years. But my mother had taught me compassion. My mother told me no matter what one does in life, he or she still deserves some compassion. And it was that compassion that made me reach out to this man next door to me. I couldn't see him, All I could do was talk. And I asked him, was anything wrong? Took him a while to reply, but a few minutes later he said, I just got worried that my mother passed. I told him how sorry I was to hear that. I sit back down on that bunk bed, and at that moment, I began to thank God because my mother was still alive. I began to thank God that I wasn't where I wanted to be. I definitely wasn't where I should be, but I began to thank God that I was alive. And as I sit there on that bunk bed, I decided that in order for me to survive this hell, I had to leave. I could not leave physically, but I sure could leave mentally. And did I leave mentally? You know, spending 30 years in hell made me do some things that I thought I would never do. In my mind, I wanted to escape, and I did escape. Of all the people in the world there was to talk to, for whatever reason, I wanted to talk to Queen Elizabeth. And in my mind, I went to England to see the Queen. In my mind, I told the guards that I was there to see the Queen. They go in and tell the Queen that I was there. The Queen invited me in. And as we sit down, we talked about Prince Charles, Prince William, Prince Harris, and the tragedy of Prince Di. About 35 to 40 minutes into this conversation, the Queen, for whatever reason, stand up, look at me, and she said, Mr. Hinton, would you like some tea? And I told her I would love some tea. And she said, what would you like in your tea? I told her a spot of lemon. She had the butler to go out and bring this lemon. I squeezed it in my tea and we talked some more. 30 minutes later, I stand up and I tell the Queen in my mind, I must be leaving. The Queen stand up and she says, Mr. Hinton, will you come back? And I told her I would love to come back. Now that I realized that I can leave death row anytime I want to, I did some at the age of 12. I said I would never do. At the age of 12, I said I would never marry. But I decided I would get married. But I didn't just marry anybody. I married the beautiful and talented actress Halle Berry. Halle Berry and I stayed married for 15 long, beautiful years up here. And if there's a thing called a perfect wife, Halle Berry was the perfect wife. Halle Berry didn't say nothing but yes, dear. Okay, dear. Whatever you want to do, dear. But I didn't love Halle for those things. I love Halle because she didn't spend any money. That's why. Then in year 16, for whatever reason, the warden decided he would show death row inmate a movie. And the movie was Speed. I looked at this woman driving this bus around and around. I'm looking at Halle. And I'm looking at Sandra Bullock for the first time. And to be honest with you, I'm really building my nerves up. Tell Halle some sad news. And when I built my nerves up, I looked at Halle and I said, Halle, whew, I'm going to divorce you. And I'm going to marry Sandra Bullock. True to her form, she just said, yes, dear. And the guard was calling me and telling me that I had a legal visit. You see, when you find yourself in predicaments that you have no control over, I learned there's nothing more powerful than the mind. The mind got me out of situation. Instead of sitting there thinking, contemplating suicide, I was able to travel. I went all over the world in my mind. I went to Italy. I don't drink, but I drank some of the best wine in the world. I had dinner with some of the most beautiful women in the world in my mind. But every now and then I would still have to think about why I was where I was. The day that they came and arrested me, I asked the officer, what am I being charged with? He said, we will explain that to you later. But right now we want you to put your hands behind your back. I complied, I put my hands behind my back. They put the handcuff on me, proceeded to put me in the car, and I said, he at least allowed me the opportunity to go in and tell my mother I'm being arrested for something. One of the detectives said, we can't let you go back in, and we argued for about 2 minutes, and finally the other detective said, let him go in and tell his mother. I goes in and I just show my mother the handcuff on me. And like any good mother, she just began to scream and holler, what are those handcuffs doing on my baby? He said, take him out while I talk to his mother. A few minutes later, he came out. We proceeded to go to the county jail. He asked me, Anthony, do you own a firearm? I said, no. I said, but my mother have an old Smith & Wesson 38 that she keep around the house for snakes or something like that. I said, but I don't own a gun. They dropped me off at a substation, went back to my mother's house, told them that I told them about the gun. She gave them the gun thinking that it would help me. When they came and picked me up, every day, somebody asked me, why did you tell the police about a gun they had no knowledge of? And I said, all of my life, my mother taught me to always tell the truth. She said, if you haven't done anything, why are you lying? If you haven't done anything, why would you run? Stand there and tell the truth. That day, the truth cost me 30 years of my life. And as we were driving to the police station, I had to ask these two detectives at least 50 times, officer, why am I being arrested? They never would respond. I asked for the 51st time, officer, why am I being arrested? And it seemed to set the officer off that wasn't driving. He turned around, he looks at me, you want to know why? I said, yes, sir. He said, we're going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnapping, and first-degree attempted murder. I said, I haven't done any of that. He said, let me tell you something right now. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it, but I'm going to make sure you're found guilty. I said, for a crime I didn't commit? He said, you must have a hearing problem. Didn't I just tell you I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it? He said, but if you don't remember nothing else, you remember I told you that I was going to make sure you found guilty. And as he drove just a little further, he turned back around. He said, hey, by the way, there's 5 things that are going to convict you. Would you like to know what they are? And I said, yes. He said, number 1, you're black. Number 2, a white man is going to say you shot him. Whether you shot him or not, believe me, I don't care. He said, number 3, you're going to have a white prosecutor. Number 4, you're going to have a white judge. And number 5, you're going to have an all-white jury. He said, do you know what that spells? He repeated the word conviction 5 times. I goes before a judge, and the judge reads the charges on him. Asks me, can I afford an attorney? And I tell him no. He looks back in his courtroom. He called his lawyer up and tell his lawyer he wanted him to represent me. But you see, before then, while I was at the police station, I asked this detective, what date and what time did this crime take place? He goes through his folders, he tells me the date and the time. And when he tells me the date and the time, I said, thank you, God. And I said, thank you, Jesus. I was thanking Jesus because my supervisor was white. And I figured once he go and talk to my white supervisor, everything would be over. He leaves and he come back about 5 hours later. He opened his cell, he said, Anthony, I have good news and bad news. The good news is we no longer going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnap, first-degree attempted murder. You was at work. I saw you on video. He said, but now we have decided we're going to charge you with 2 counts, first-degree counterterrorism. I said, but I haven't killed anyone. I haven't robbed anyone. He said, Anthony, you need to do something about that hearing problem. I told you on the way here, I didn't care. I don't care about these new charges either. I sit there and I tried to talk to this officer. I tried to persuade him that I wasn't the one. With tears coming down my cheeks, I said, officer, there's no way I could kill another human being. That officer looked at me. He said, I truly believe you. He said, I've been doing this a long time. He said, but since you didn't do it, one of your homeboys had to do it. Take this rap for one of your homeboys. He said, since y'all is always helping one another, take this rap for your homeboy. I looked at this officer and I said, officer, there's not a homeboy in this world I would take a rap for like this. I sit in jail for 1.5 years. The lawyer that the state of Alabama appointed me did just enough to get me convicted. The day I was convicted, the judge stood up proudly. He said, Anthony Ray Hinton, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. It is the order of this court that I sentence you to death. And that judge had the audacity to say, may God have mercy on your soul. The prosecution ran out and told the world that the state of Alabama got the worst killer that ever walked the street off the streets that day. But it wasn't true. And on December 17, 1986, I arrived at Holman Correctional Facility where they house death row inmates. That's where I would remain for 30 years. I kept asking myself, what kind of system do we have that an innocent man can be mowing the grass and yet he can go to death row? Well, I found out what kind of system we have. We have a corrupt system. We have a system, as Brian Stevenson would say, that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. I never will forget the judge asked me, could I afford an attorney? And therefore, if you cannot afford an attorney, shame on you. I realize that we have a system that don't care about truth. I realize that we have a system that people will love to say that we have a mass incarceration problem in America. For all y'all that is political, I'm going to let you have that word, mass incarceration. But I'm going to tell you what I truly know it to be. We have a new form of slavery in this country. You don't want to talk about it, but I will, because I was enslaved for 30 years. I have a right to talk about it. The very people that you put in office, they are the ones that want to see your little sons and daughters in prison. You can't convince me that 2.6 million Americans is in prison or on probation in America. But I live in a state. I want y'all smart people to help me because I'm dumb and mad now. I can count my own money. I can't count nobody's money but mine. But I want you to help me with this statistic. In the state of Alabama, African Americans make up 27% of the general population. But when you go to prison, African Americans make up 96% of the prison population. How do you come from 27% to 96%? I can't do that math, I don't try. I need one of the politicians who's not afraid to tell me how they get those numbers. You see, for 30 years, instead of me being angry, I tried to educate myself. I tried to find out why it happened, and I'm trying to find a way to keep it from happening to someone else. For 27 years, the state of Alabama refused to do the right thing. Brian Stevenson came and he said, Anthony, 14 judges in Alabama refused to do the right thing. He said, it's not time for us to go to the United States Supreme Court, but I believe this is our only revenues to go to the United States Supreme Court. You see, within that 16 years, I got the worst news that I could ever get, and that is the passing of my mother. When I got that news, I told Bryant, I don't give a damn about this case. The state of Alabama can execute me right now if they want to. You see, I didn't want to live in a world without my mother. I truly believe that my mother is the only one that ever loved me unconditionally. You see, my mother was the type, as a boy, she loved me, and as you generation now, you say I spanked him. You know, I want to see what a spanking feel like. I ain't never had that. I had some whooping. Oh, I had some whooping. I had some marks to show you I had a whooping. And then the funny thing about my mother, she would whoop me, marks on my arm, on my behind, and she loved to say, did you buy them clothes you got on? I said, no, ma'am. Well, you need to get out of them, because I don't want to tear up my clothes. And when she would get through whooping me, she would give me the biggest hug and the biggest kiss on the cheek. And she said, I whooped you because I love you. Now, under my breath, I was saying, Mama don't love me. But when I went to death row, all of her teaching came into play. My mother told me that there will be some that hate you simply because of the color of your skin. My mother didn't say white. She didn't say black. She just said there will be some. My mother would tell me that you are responsible for how you treat others. You are not responsible for how they treat you. All of that took place in my mind when I was sitting there in that 5x7. And I began to take who I was into practice. I opened up my own book club on death row. But there's a story I have to tell tonight. For those of you who refuse to buy the book, who don't want to buy the book, there's a story in this book about a young man by the name of Henry Francis Hayes. Henry Francis Hayes was a Ku Klux Klansman. Henry Francis Hayes was born to a father who was the grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama. And can you imagine all of this boy life he was taught to hate? And one day, his daddy gave him and two other Klansmen an order. Told him to go out and kill the first African-American male they came across. They came across a 19-year-old mentally retarded black man. They befriended him, got him in their car, and they stabbed him 65 times. That wasn't enough for Henry. Henry got out of the car and threw a rope over the power line and hung him right there in the streets of Mobile, Alabama. That wasn't enough for Henry. Henry went in his pocket and got his knife out, unzipped the black male pants and cut off his genitals. That seemed to soothe Henry. Oh, yeah, it sounds terrible. But you know, we love to say it takes a village to raise a child. I often wonder, where was that village when this young boy was crying for help? Where was the village when this young boy was being taught to hate? You see, we bear responsibility too. We see children that is in need of some love, but we refuse to love them. So Henry was convicted of capital murder. Henry was sentenced to death. And for whatever reason, and I believe that God put him right next to me. When you come to death row, no one can see who you are. We call everybody by their name, Anthony and whatever you go by. Well, Henry and I began to talk. 3 weeks later, I get this note. I was asked the question, do you know who you're talking to every day? And I hollered out for whoever sent this note, I'm talking to Henry. And on that note, they said, that is the man, the Ku Klux Klansman that hung that kid. I hollered over there to Henry. I said, Henry, why you didn't tell me who you were? Henry did not respond. And after Henry didn't respond, I asked myself a profound question. That question was, does it matter? And I had to be true to me, it didn't matter. My mother said that no matter what one does, he still deserves some compassion. I talked to Henry every day from that day on. I tried to show Henry that his father and mother had lied to him all his life. One day they allowed 6 of us to go to the law library, and Henry was in there. And I said, Henry, I have 5 fingers like you have. I have 2 eyes like you have. I have 2 ears like you do. I have a nose. I said, Henry, if you want me to, I'll take off my shoe. I have all 10 toes. I said, Henry, to show you we all alike, I took a little pen and I stuck myself in. I squeezed a little blood. I said, look at there, Henry, red blood. I said, Henry, show me your green blood, Henry. Now that you know we all got the same feature, your daddy told you we was different, it has to be the blood. Henry said, Ray, you know my blood is not green. I said, well, Henry, what is it that makes us different? Henry said, I don't know. Well, as God would have it, the very 2 people that taught him to hate came to see him. His mother came and she died on the visiting yard of a massive heart attack. We wept for Henry, we comforted Henry. 2 months later, his father came. He too died of a massive heart attack right there on death row. And Henry got an execution date. And Henry was without family. Henry wrote to the warden and said, I am requesting that Anthony Ray Hinton be with me on the day of my execution. The warden granted his request, but just wouldn't grant me watching the execution, which I would never have done. All of that day, Henry and I laughed, and I wanted Henry to laugh. I didn't want Henry to think about what was going to take place. About 6 o'clock that evening, they brought in Henry final meal. They lift up the tray and there was an 8-ounce steak. I said, Henry, you ready to die? He said, what you mean? I said, that's all you want, an 8-ounce steak? He looked at me and he said, Ray, can I ask you a question? I already knew what the question was. He said, what are you going to order if it come your time? I said, I'm glad you asked that, Henry. I said, what I want, they're going to have to go out in the forest and get it. And when they bring it back, I'm going to say, that ain't what I told y'all about. Therefore, they're going to have to go back to the forest. I said, every time they come back, I said, Henry, in other words, if there's a law that say I can't be executed until I eat my last meal, I said, Henry won't be here forever. I said, cause nothing they bring is going to be what I want. I said, but you ready to die. But then they told me it was time to leave. You see, I have always been a person that believed that laughter is good for the soul. And every now and then I think you ought to make yourself laugh. Find somebody that can make you laugh. They told me to say my goodbye to Henry. We hugged. And I told Henry that it is my prayer that I see him again one day. They strapped Henry in the chair. They dropped the mic down and asked him, did he have any final words? Henry said, all of my life, my mother, my father, my community taught me to hate. The very people that they taught me to hate for the last 15 years have shown me nothing but love. And tonight, as I leave this world, I leave this world knowing what love feels like. I am asked every day, why do you believe or do you think God allowed you to go to death row? And my answer is, I truly believe that God knew that I would give Henry nothing but love. Because Henry deserved love like every one of us. It wasn't Henry's fault that he was born to racist parents. I think we all have a duty to love one another. I think if we don't learn to love one another, we are bound to destroy one another. In closing, I probably gone over my 30 minutes. This is a story you can't tell in 30. But I want you to know that I saved the justice part for the question. But justice is not blind. She can see. She might have a rag over her eyes, but she can see through it. She knows exactly where you live. She knows exactly what neighborhood you live in. She knows where you work. She knows what college you attend. She knows something that none of us want her to know. She knows exactly how much money you have in the bank. And when she put all of those things together, when you find yourself in her courtroom, those are the things that she weighed. And by those things, you have already been found guilty or not guilty before you enter her court. We need to stop pretending that justice is blind. No, justice is not blind. Had justice been blind, I never would have went to death row. You see, the state of Alabama didn't have nothing on me. The state of Alabama didn't have fingerprint, eyewitness, nothing. Oh, yes, they did. One of the co-workers heard the detective said they was looking for a light-skinned black male with a full beard. Yeah, this used to be black. And that, they asked him, what is his name? And he gave them my name, and that is all they had. They came with a restaurant, arrested me for a crime that they knew that I didn't commit. I want you to know that justice is not blind. I want you to know that every day in this country, men and women goes to prison because somebody in America is making a lot of money off of slavery. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we're getting ready to transition to the panel phase of our program. Mr. Hinton will be available after the program in the room to the back to sign books, and we do have his books available to purchase for $15. We do take credit cards as well as cash. As we're transitioning, I think I'm going to ask a couple of trivial questions, and if you get the answer correct, I'll give you a free copy of the book. So, Mr. Hinton always referenced his mother and his mother. So my mother taught me that if you make one or two real friends in this lifetime, you're a blessed person. Well, Mr. Hinton had a friend in this book that's stuck closer to him, closer than a brother. And so, does anybody know the name of that friend? Everybody, show of hands. Who knows the answer? Yes.
Okay, Lester.
Okay, this is more comical. Mr. Hinton stole a car, but he returned the car. How long did he keep the car? Hey.
2 years.
Yep. While we're transitioning, I think we can, would you go and entertain a couple of questions? Would anybody like to ask Mr. Hinton a question? Okay.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing that story with us, that life story that we could all benefit from. You spoke about in the first part of the book about not liking the coal mines, not wanting to work in the coal mine, yet you force yourself being a coal mine. I just want to find out, have you to answer, how much of that experience you had in the coal mine helped you to survive being in that 5x7 cell?
It helped me more, I would say 98%, because I was used to being in the dark, those environments. The coal mine, if you've never seen it or ever heard of it, it is probably the most dangerous job one could have. The rocks could fall on me anytime. Being there gave me the sense of hope that if God allowed me to work in that coal mine for 13 years and not let a rock fall on me and kill me, surely He would take care of me in this cell. It is funny how I was able to take my life, my experience from working to playing, and just translate it into everyday living. In that same book, I imagined playing baseball for the New York Yankees. I played basketball for the pathetic Knicks. I won Wimbledon 5 straight years. And people ask me, do I ever get mad? And I say yes. The fact that I won Wimbledon 5 straight years and I have yet to receive my Rolex make me angry, but I use my life of good time. I hold it into where I was to make it bad time, the good time. And so I just relived my life, those early 29 years that I had lived. I used to the best of my ability to not think about where I was. And regardless of what one goes through in life, I learned this. If you put your mind, body on somebody else's problem, at the end of the day, you haven't had time to worry about yours. And I did that every day. I thought about somebody that's trying to help them with their case. Talk about it. Sometimes all you need to do is your ear to someone. So that's how I did it. Every way that I could possibly imagine, I tried to do it. And let me make this clear before we go there. Don't think for one moment I used my mind with Halle Berry and Sandra Bullock and anything negative. I was around men and I just wanted to be around a woman in my mind and talk to them. But anything other than that, a conversation and just having a general conversation, I didn't do that. You know, I was already in hell. And the last thing I wanted to do is think about a woman in a way that wouldn't help me at all. And so I love to make that clear to people. I use those two women, and I'm hoping when Oprah make the movie, I can see both of them. I'm gonna make one of them married.
Let's give Mr. Hinton another round of applause. I would like to invite all panelists to take their seats on the stage. Welcome everyone. My name is Kaylin Richards. I am the Office Coordinator and Communications Assistant at the Delaware Center for Justice. I would like to take some time to say thank you to the Wilmington Public Library for inviting me to moderate tonight's panel on criminal justice reform. Before the panelists introduce themselves, I would like to get a better sense of who's in the room tonight. Who are we talking to? Who are we engaging with? So, if you align with any of these groups, please make some noise. Not too much, we are in the library. But please make some noise if you are an activist. We have an activist in the room, okay? I see you, just keep it, I see you. Do we have any educators in the room? Again, I see you. Do we have any advocates, attorneys, lawmakers? Okay. Do we have any voters in the room? Well, let's jump right into it. Starting with Dr. Ray, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Dr.
The mic.
My name is Dr. Anthony Ray Hinton, and I say doctor because I was given an honorary doctorate degree from the University of St. Bonaventure in Buffalo, New York. I am a man that is on a mission to end the death penalty in this country. I'm on a mission to try and get people that have the power to bring changes to a system that they would love to say is broken, but I don't really believe it's broken. It worked exactly the way that it was designed to work.
How's everyone doing? My name is Emeka Igwe. I'm an attorney. I practice in Philadelphia, but we also have a Delaware office. We're a law firm that's dedicated to doing civil rights. We worked on a similar case to Mr. Hinton's case, a man here in the state of Delaware by the name of Elmer Daniels, who was wrongfully convicted and incarcerated for 39 years for a crime he didn't commit. And with the help of my investigator in the back, Terrence Jones, we were able to see his indictment dismissed by the state of Delaware.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kathy Jennings. I'm an almost brand new Attorney General for the state of Delaware. And I am here tonight, and I ran to begin to fix all of the wrongs and to make sure that, number one, we never bring back the death penalty in the state of Delaware. That we change the laws that are on their face discriminatory, and that we change the way justice isn't delivered in this state to make sure it is delivered in a fair, equal way for everyone. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hanifa Shabazz, and I'm currently the president of Wilmington City Council. I'm proud to say I'm the first woman president of City Council. I've served as a public servant in local municipalities for the past 15 years. I also was the champion who asked the Center for Disease Control to come into the city of Wilmington and investigate what I said was an epidemic of mental illness that our children were suffering from that's resulting in the massive amount of gun violence. I'm proud to say that I'm a champion of the organization now known as the Wilmington Community Advisory Council, which is about 50 organizations who's working collaboratively outside of the silos to mitigate the violence that we're suffering here in the city of Wilmington.
Good evening. My name is Kyle Shepard. I am a native of Castle, Delaware. I guess less from title aside, I was speaking to Mr. Dr. Anthony Ray Hinton earlier and said, humbled to be here, honored to be here, but we should not be here, essentially having these conversations. I am 28 years old. I'm younger, and I've been alive for less years than this man is on death row. I'm trying to picture that and imagine that and grapple with that and figure out what that means. It's nice that my role on the piece of paper and on the flyer says community advocate, but advocacy for me would mean spending the next 30 years of my life making sure that situations like what this man went through does not take place.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Darius Brown. I serve as state senator here in the city of Wilmington, also chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and chair of the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus. I know we'll talk about some legislation as we go through the night, but do want to highlight over this past first year of session of the passage of our adult expungement bill, and Kathy was being very humble in her work, working with us as legislators. She has been a great champion around criminal justice reform here in the state of Delaware.
This first question is for all panelists. How can we advance the criminal justice system? Feel free to jump in.
I think we can advance it only by putting the right people in. And I don't mean you vote on a racist line. You have to get out, do your homework. And I think we miss a big point when we know that justice is not served to those who deserve it the most. We must learn every day to do. We must do what we have to do to make sure justice is served. Again, it's hard for me to say serve because I said it before. The justice system is work exactly the way it was designed to work. And the only way we're going to make it and advance it is that we're going to have to tear down the way that it was built and rebuild it. And the only way we rebuild it is by voting.
Thank you. Dr. Shabazz, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to share that first we must educate ourselves on what the justice system actually says and does. A lot of times we don't get engaged with it until we have to use it or we find ourselves in the midst of it. or loved one in the midst of it, but knowing what it is, and when you being really engaged to policies that are being put through. We send elected officials to our positions to do legislation, and then we don't ever follow up to see what legislation they're passing, what the legislation says. I think we just need to be a more engaged citizenship as to the laws that are being passed and how it actually does affect us socially.
Attorney General Jennings.
Thank you. I think the justice system will change in Delaware. We have begun to make those changes that are necessary, one change at a time. But I think each one of us, everyone in the audience and everyone up here on the panel, we have to be vigilant each and every day. We have to be courageous to do the things that make us uncomfortable and get out of our skins and to have the courage to say, this is wrong and I'm gonna fix it. This is unjust and I'm gonna open my heart to the injustice so I know how to make it better. And I think if each one of us is vigilant and each one of us at every step of the way has the courage to do that, that'll make a big difference. And Brian Stevenson always says, you have to get proximate to something before you can begin to understand it. And we need to do that as attorneys, as elected officials. We need to be where injustices happen. We need to understand it. Don't be afraid. Speak about it and change your own behavior, and you will begin to see others follow you.
Thank you. Ray?
Just hop in on that.
Attorney.
Real quick. Just briefly, I think we need to focus on the word justice. Justice is a two-edged sword. Yes, those who are guilty should be held accountable, but equally important, if not more important, those who are innocent should be acquitted and exonerated. And it's up to everyone involved in the system to make sure that happens. That starts with holding law enforcement accountable. Prosecutors should be held accountable. It can't be this attitude that win at all costs. Prosecutors, law enforcement always have to act in the interest of justice. And too often, that doesn't occur, and it results in cases like Mr. Hinton's and my client Elmer Daniels. So having that attitude towards justice is critical.
Thank you.
I have to respond to what you said.
Okay, really quickly, because we got to move on to the next question.
The United States Supreme Court have given every prosecutor in America a blank check. They cannot be held responsible unless we, the people, demand that that ruling be overturned. They cannot be held responsible because they represent you, the people. And it have been ruled that they cannot be sued, civil or liable in any shape, form, or fashion. And where I'm from, they reward you when you do bad.
Thank you. So, Ray, your case is one of the greatest injustices that I've ever read. The causes that led to your conviction are some of the leading causes of wrongful convictions throughout the country. And those causes are, and I know you have something to add, and we're going to get to that, those causes are misleading evidence, false witness identification, and inadequate legal defense. And we got into, we touched on it a little, how do we hold law enforcement, prosecutors, and all those involved in these cases, how do we hold them accountable? Attorney General Jennings, I would like to get your perspective on this as well.
Let me first say, you named everything but the main reason.
Let us know what that is.
Born black in America. Let's not kid ourselves that you went to school and became a lawyer. It is designed for you to believe that every one of us have the equal opportunity to succeed. That's a lie. Every one of us don't have that to succeed. But as far as the officer, it's a change of command, a change of offense. I think bad officers should be fired, they should be prosecuted, If you go back to every city that have tried a white officer for killing a black, they tried them in a suburban court. They didn't try them like they would try you in a regular court. And every time they took him out to that white community said not guilty. I think in order for the Attorney General, the District Attorney, the Mayor, and everybody must get on board and say they're gonna be tried just like anyone else right here in the city of Delaware.
All right. That's right.
The police officer that was convicted in Dallas, she was not sent to the suburb. And by not being sent to the suburb, she was the first one to be found not guilty. This is why we started, because they have all of these backings. You might be the first Attorney General that I know of that's fighting not to bring the death penalty back. Or you might be one that is truly trying to do the right thing. But I can attest to where I live. Finding the right people is one of the biggest problems that I have, because I don't know do y'all do it up here, but in Alabama and out through the South, they have redistricting. And we don't have a chance when it comes to making laws and making order, because they give you a little district and you have 5 maybe senators. What can 5 black senators vote on and get it passed through the legislature? Nothing. We got our homework to do. We got to tear down this redistrict where everybody would have equal opportunity to have a representation.
Attorney General Jennings.
So specifically with respect to the evidence or the lack thereof, Ray, I think it is remarkable to me that the judge in your case and your defense counsel thought that your expert could only be paid $1,000 at the most. And so that's how you ended up with the person who testified, who was frankly terrible on the witness stand. And so one of the things we have to do is make sure that evidence that is presented well. That means making sure that there are sufficient resources for defense counsel, that they're not just being paid at some poverty level and somebody gets appointed to a case and they have a thriving practice somewhere else, and so they're not paying attention to that case. I think that's really important that we have resources for defense counsel and frankly for the prosecution, because when caseloads are so heavy that prosecutors can't or aren't examining every corner to determine if someone should go to trial or not. We have a very high standard in this country, and we ought to use that high standard, and that is guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And that has to be in our minds. We also have to make sure that forensic evidence that gets presented in a courtroom is solid evidence. You know, because I'm sure you've read about hair evidence and how the FBI, they did it in Delaware. I prosecuted rape cases back, 20 years ago, and the FBI would come testify. They were forensic analysts, and they walked in their fancy suits, and they would get up on the witness stand, and they were taught how to testify, make sure you look at the jury, make sure you're definitive, and they were sort of the best of the bunch, and juries just flat out believed them. They believed them. Well, it turns out all these years later, decades later, that they were exaggerating the conclusiveness of their comparisons, and tragically, in some instances, not even doing the testing and making up the conclusion. And so the United States government has been sending now for years scores of cases into Delaware, hundreds of cases where there was evidence like that presented in a court of law. So that's a very, very important lesson for us all to learn. It's a human life. It's a human being who's being accused, and we need to get that right.
Thank you. Senator Brown. You are a leading legislator in Delaware's criminal justice reform efforts. What legislation are you currently working on that will remedy wrongful convictions and other flaws within the system?
So how we reform Delaware's criminal justice system, it's a three-legged stool. We look at our law enforcement, our local police. We also look at our prosecutors, those that are working in the State Attorney General's office, and also within our court system before individuals enter into corrections, which is a place that should be a place of correction and rehabilitation. Delaware's Department of Corrections. One of the pieces of legislation that we have introduced and that everyone in this room I would admonish and ask to be involved and engaged in is recorded interrogations. For many of those in this room that are familiar with what occurred in New York in Central Park with the Central Park 5, and there's so many other instances of that around the country. And so in Delaware, we have a policy that we are currently working to codify so that we can adopt recorded interrogations for local law enforcement.
Thank you.
So for you all in this room, please, I appreciate the applause, but please, we need you when we go back into session in January to be engaged in this effort because for many law enforcement officers, they would rather it be a policy and not codified into law because that means they have to be held to a certain standard of accountability. So we need your engagement in that effort.
Thank you. Attorney Igwe, you recently had a successful outcome with a wrongful conviction case, and it took Ray's attorney over 12 years of litigation to prove his innocence. What made you want to take on Elmer Daniels' case?
It's a case that has too many familiar themes, just like Mr. Hinton's case, where you have a false witness identification. You have, as you mentioned, Attorney General, an FBI agent who falsely claimed he could make matches based upon hair comparison analysis. So in our case, he said a piece of hair that was found on the victim's underwear matched a piece of hair that was on my client's pants. He said it was a double match. In other words, that the victim's hair was found on our client's pants, and the victim's hair was found on our client's pants, and my client's hair was found on the victim's underwear. So a double match. When we got involved in the case, we looked at the transcripts. We realized this agent testified falsely. We sent the evidence to the FBI, and the FBI wrote the former Attorney General of Delaware, Matthew P. Dan. He then admitted in this case that the agent testified beyond the means of science. In other words, he testified falsely. So it was a case where you have false forensic evidence, you have false witness identification, you have an ineffective defense counsel, and you have, quite frankly, what I believe to be an overzealous prosecutor who had an interest in convicting Mr. Daniels at all costs. And the combination of all those things led to Mr. Daniels being convicted. So when I met Mr. Daniels and he told me his story, and we looked at the case, we realized, in fact, he was innocent. And now that he is released, we want Delaware to become one of the 39 states that has a bill to compensate those who have been wrongfully convicted and incarcerated.
Attorney General James?
When you say that defense counsel was ineffective, it's my understanding that one of the witnesses, the witness, said that he recognized your client as the person who committed the crime because he had gone to school with that individual. Well, nobody ever checked the school records until you came along. And you checked the school records, he did not go to school with Elmer Daniels. And so when I say vigilant, I really mean vigilant.
And I just want to give credit again to my investigator in the back from my law firm, Terrence Jones.
Kyle, and this question is for Kyle and City Council President Shabazz. It's no secret that past and current criminal justice practices have negatively impacted communities of color, with Black men and boys being the most targeted groups. in your experience, or in your opinion, I should say, how can we restore individuals who are impacted by poor criminal justice practices, as well as restore communities as well, and remedy the harm that we've caused on these communities?
Short answer, if we could figure that out, we'd be going places. At this current moment, we do not have that figured out, but to answer one of the questions that was picked up earlier about how do we move criminal justice forward, I'll tailor that in saying, I think language and words are powerful. So the idea, the concept that we're trying to move criminal justice forward would mean that there's an active investment into moving a system that should not exist in the first place forward. What we need to do, if criminal justice exists because people's basic needs are not being met, right? Why are people committing crimes, if they even are, right? Why are they accused of committing particular crimes? How is that situation leading up in the first place? And in terms of what does restoration look like for individuals or for communities, Malcolm X, when interviewed at one time, he had answered somebody asking him if progress was being made during these turbulent times in the 60s, and he vehemently said, no, progress is not being made. If you stab me in my back with a knife that's 9 inches and you pull that knife out 6 inches and you ask me how I'm feeling, where is that progress? There's no progress in that. There's absolutely no progress in that. I'm not one to believe that the knife has been pulled out of the backs of black and brown boys and young men in this country. I don't think it's been done. And to that note, in terms of restoration, and there's groups who can talk about it as a justice lens a lot better than I can, but you have to have that person who is the accuser, the one who has done wrong, the one who is contributing to an oppressive society that has historically incorporated each facet of its way of life into dehumanizing and breaking down individuals. If they can't admit that they're doing something wrong, we got a long way to go.
We're going to go to Khalifa, and then we'll come to you, Ray.
Well, we have to understand that that person is now traumatized, they're scarred, they've been jolted. So how do we repair or heal? I won't say repair, how do we heal that person? And so understanding what that person's needs might be is being able to provide the different type of life antidotes, so that person, it would never make them whole again, but be able to give them what they need to be able to heal so that they can probably get back into society's life. And then even when you're dealing with that person, you deal with them not because in the same way you would put someone who hasn't experienced this trauma, but to deal with them with the understanding that this person has been traumatized, and you use all the trauma-informed care science that's out that we understand is available in dealing with that person, and provide them the necessary resources so that they can, and support systems that are necessary for a person who has been traumatized. You can no longer treat that person as if they have not had this experience. You know, they're going to need the continuous support, resources, and understanding so that they can try their best to get back onto life's track, but understanding that they'll probably never be back on life's track, so don't expect that type of expectations from them, and support them the best way we can.
Thank you.
Let me say,
On that note, could I say this here? No, we're not allowed. We're not allowed. I got to say what I got to say, because this man been in jail 50 years since he was 17 years old. You don't have no business putting your hands on me. I got bail money. But,
excuse me, sir, out of respect for the panelists.
Can you ask them to look into his case? He's been in jail since he was 17 years old, ever since 1969. And I'm saying he's a model inmate today, but I'm saying he hasn't been accused of killing nobody, ain't been on death row. But I got to ask.
Can we talk? Can we talk? We're going to talk, and I'm going to ask you to give me the name of that person, and then we're going to talk about it.
Thank you.
Can I say something else about? Oh, I'm sorry. You were about to talk. We hope to get a bill introduced and passed this next session of the legislature that will provide compensation. Money
is not restoration. What you went through, sir, can never be given back to you. But I think we have to, as a society, not just walk away and say, oh, that was a mistake.
Right.
There really needs to be compensation.
Yeah, HB 196 is the bill. It is wrongful compensation is the bill that'll be introduced in January.
Oh.
That's really, I just need to emphasize that point, because yes, you can never give somebody back the years that they spent in prison, but they leave prison with no resources for basic necessities. So, we have elected officials here, and I thank God that we have senators and an attorney general who wants this to happen. Remember, Delaware is one of 11 states in this country that has no compensation for those who've been wrongfully convicted. We had the bill, we helped sponsor the bill, HB, what was it, 190?
HB 196.
196. It wasn't brought to the floor for a vote. So what I want everyone in this room to do is to contact the Speaker of the House and say, please, in the January session, bring this bill on the House for a vote.
Thank you. Ray, you had something to add to the last question?
Let me say that if you got a bill passed, the very people that did this will not contribute to it. It's the taxpayer who's going to put that bill. I think you need bills to put them jokers in jail.
All right.
I'm starting a unit down in Alabama. I'm trying to get it kicked off. They call it the integrity unit with all the district attorneys. I shouldn't have to come out of death row for 30 years and say to the district attorney, we need an integrity unit. The integrity should be when you took oath of office. The integrity should be when you made up your mind that you was going to run for office. No innocent man or no innocent woman should go to prison if the district attorney had any integrity in the first place. You see, the police and the district attorney are the ones that gather up the evidence, they present it to the judges. All of these little cahoots is in cahoots with one another. And they go up there and they falsify evidence. And as I said, I didn't know whether you did. I try to read and I try to have my facts together. When the United States Supreme Court gave every district attorney in the United States a blank check, they can put false witness up there. You can come back later and say, that witness lied, we're gonna sue, you can't sue him. But let him put a false witness up there, and the district attorney turn around and charge you with perjury. We got to make this playing level field as even as we can. We can't do it tonight, then when you go home, you don't forget all about what was said and what you need to do. Oh. And it bothers me when I hear that we want to again put the bills at the foot of the taxpayer. Let them bastards that put me in prison pay out of their pocket. That's just the case. You see, because I was at home, she didn't do anything to me. She didn't make me go to prison. The district attorney and the judges, and how is it that a judge can sit up there and take over the prosecution as far as witness? Every lawyer is not dedicated like you. Every lawyer is not dedicated like Brian Stevenson. I was asked 3 weeks ago by one of the United States senators if I could do anything and had one wish, what would I wish for? I didn't wish for $1,000 or $1 million. I wish that we could clone Brian Stevenson to 500,000. I know that he may stop. And you know, we got state appointed attorneys, they don't get paid nothing in the South. I don't know what you pay them up here per case. And that's why so many men and women plead guilty to crime they didn't get permitted, because they go to the DA and he said, well, if I take it to trial, I'm going to give him 70 years. But if he pleads guilty, I'm going to only give him 30 years. And that lawyer goes and tells you what is best for you to go and plead guilty. Man, we got a lot of work to do. And I would love to say excited, but you see, I've been excited before, and after this meeting ends, the dreams end.
That's right.
You know, they need your support. They need you to call and sponsor the bill, but I'm against putting any bills on the taxpayer. Make up a bill where the prosecutor, let's overturn the United States Supreme Court. Let's put some people on there that are gonna put some United States Supreme Court justice up there. They're gonna do what's right. As long as we got those up there now, we blowing up smoke.
Thank you. We are almost out of time, so I am going to pass it to Attorney Igwe to respond to this last question.
Sure. Well, I just want to follow up on what Mr. Hinton says. You know, we say people aren't above the law, but yeah, there are some people above the law. You know, if a prosecutor or even a judge can't be held civilly liable for malicious, purposeful things that they do on cases that result in people being wrongfully convicted and incarcerated, then it's not a true justice system. So there should be accountability for those who do something wrong. I will encourage everyone here, if you get a chance to be a jury, on a jury, please take that opportunity. I know a lot of times, you know, we have work obligations, but what ends up happening is a lot of times we recuse ourselves, and we may recuse ourselves from a case like Mr. Hinton's case, and it results in a conviction. So if you get that mail, and just see this your civic duty to serve on a jury.
Let me say, I did 30 years, as you know, in hell. The state of Alabama, no one in the state of Alabama have had the decency to say, Mr. Hinton, we're sorry. The state of Alabama have not given me one penny. The state of Alabama have not said, Mr. Hinton, we got state doctors, and if you would love to go see a psychiatrist or psychologist, you can. I'm having to deal with this, but I say this and I say it proudly. I have the best psychologist and psychiatry in the world, and that's God. And so by the grace of God, I am where I am, and I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me. But I want to say this. Amen. When you have a system that's as corrupt, and the people that's running the system, they don't want to make changes because then you is interfering with their money. They get money off of sending men and women to prison every day. Let's stop and tell the people. This is a business. This is a business. This is $1 billion business a year. We rent out prisoners to other states. So let's be very careful. The only answer that I can give you tonight, that you got to get angry, you got to take your anger to the ballot box, and you got to put people in there that are going to do the will of the people.
Thank you. Woo! Everyone, let's give Mr. Hinton one last round of applause. Please bounce ahead to the back of the library on the first floor, where books will be available for a $15 donation. Please will also be available to sign the books. All right, and so we're just going to have one last final thought from the rest of the panelists while Mr. Hinton makes his way back to the reference center. So starting with Senator Brown, can we get one last final thought, and where can people find you online or on social media?
Well, I think everybody's leaving.
I know, so let's give them this information before they head out the door. Tell us where we can find you, how we can get in touch with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I would like to share with the public who's still here that there is, as I spoke about the Center for Disease Control, there's a Wilmington Community Advisory Council that's working with about 50 organizations, private and nonprofit, that's working to implement the recommendations that the CDC said that's resulting in the violence. We have to understand that Mr. Henson was a grown man, but we have children that's on their way to the same prison pipeline. And that we need you to work collectively with us to address the issues and turn the systems around that we know that now is breeding that. We had an epidemic of suicides in the lower Delaware and homicides here in northern Wilmington. So there's something that we are doing wrong and we're creating a healthy environment for our children to grow. We have a website, the Wilmington Community Advisory Council. We have community meetings, and we ask that you learn about us, partner with us, so that we can change the system and the environment so our children can continue to grow and thrive. Thank you.
Attorney General James.
Well, I know everybody's anxious to get their book signed and leave, but please remember, I know we've said it several times up here tonight, get involved. Your legislators pay attention when you call. The bills that are going to be considered to change unjust laws are up on the General Assembly's website, and they reflect when they're going to be heard, when they're going to be heard in committee, when they're going to be heard on the floor of the Senate and of the House. Your involvement makes a difference, and it makes a difference in the votes. So please, please get involved. And thank you for being here tonight. I have a feeling since you were here, you're going to be involved. Thank you.
Represented by Ms. Naked, Delaware Center for Justice, the Wilmington Public Library, and everyone here for being involved and coming out. This is such an important topic, and the fact that you guys are here on a Wednesday night when you could be watching the World Series or anything else, you're here, shows that you care. So please keep the engagement and involvement up, as General said.
Kyle, one last thought.
Definitely. Kyle Shepard, I do youth and community engagement. I think the AG mentioned it earlier. If you want to solve a problem, stay in proximity to that issue and what you're trying to solve, and make sure we're highlighting the people who are doing that work. And I wanted to call out and signal Savannah Shepard. Savannah, can you stand up real quick? Savannah and her tribe and her community has been doing so much work around work like this, not just on wrongful conviction, but in the importance of recognizing those who have been either accused of things that they have not done or who are not receiving the recognition that they should be. So if you really want to keep this conversation moving, just move it along with the people who are doing that work, and it really starts with our young people. So go get Savannah's autograph.
Thank you. One last round of applause for our panelists. Thank you all for coming